So last month we made $2,732,855 selling coaching and info products. And in today's video, I'm gonna give you guys a fully monthly recap alongside some of the wins and like validated things, challenges we've faced, as well as lessons and observations we've done in the process of it, as well as the focus for the month of August. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jeremy. I'm the co-founder of Social Profit Media. We're an Instagram marketing and monetization agency. I'm helping some of the biggest info names in the world grow and monetize their coaching offer by building their personal brand on Instagram. And so what I'm going to break down to you guys is like some of the big things that we've noticed, because there's been like quite a few shifts. So what I'm doing is I'm post 2 videos a week. If you don't follow me already, please subscribe, leave a comment there, and hope I can give some value to you guys. So basically, just to kind of go through the rough metrics. So the 2 things we look at is obviously how much we cash collected and how much we grew followers. So as you can see, we collected $2.7 million in cash collected last month across all of our clients, which is like I think it's 8 or 9 clients right now. It was roughly $3 million, so slight decrease. But I'm gonna get to that in a bit. So we had 42,000 new leads. Off of that, booked 2,900 calls. Had a few overlaps obviously from last month. Had a near 60, it's a bit higher than that. It's like 60 plus show rate, 40% close rate. So that's pretty much that, and a 7% lead to call ratio. Okay. On the follower side, we had 100,000 followers, spent 71,000. So we had like a 70-cent cost per follow, which is really good. And then obviously when you look at the cost per lead and the cost per acquisitions, those are pretty phenomenal. Now, I want to go through first a few quick wins. I think it's just easier to start off with that. Basically, like I personally was able to speak at Jeremy Haynes Mastermind. I think that was pretty damn cool. Basically just held a keynote around how we turn no names into 8-figure personal brands. Just sort of more the setting side of things and just a general framework that my business partner and I have really mastered and nearly perfected over the past 5 years. Then what we had is we had one of our clients that we took on is honestly like probably one of our favorite clients. He hit $324,000 in Instagram sales alone in his second month, which is pretty awesome because like that gives us a good roadmap to hit 500K or 400K in the month of August. So really trying to like ramp him up. And again, this is just Instagram traffic. I think the client did like 1.5 million in that month. And then as well, one initiative that my business partner was really leading that's been a massive success is like media buying scaling. For us, media buying is we do a lot of shout outs. That's really what we're kind of known for. So it's basically like using theme pages to promote our clients and generate leads and followers through that. One thing that's been super effective there is like him and our media buyer. They basically like have worked hard to like get more advertisers on, scale the overall spend, and come up with different ways to spend more so we can get more traffic, more leads, and everything. So that's been a massive success. Also turned into a bit of an issue, but we'll get to that in a sec. Once again, for us, an agency, we crossed 400K a month again, which is pretty cool. And again, it just comes as a result of making people a fuck ton of money, which is really good. And then honestly, we had an accidental retargeting ads validation, which I'll speak on in focus and observations. Now, I want to head on the challenges because July was a pretty tricky month, to be quite frank with you guys. We had much bigger plans. Like our goal was probably to, potentially hit our first 500K month, which we would have needed to hit like 800 or 900,000 in sales more here, which we didn't. So I'm gonna speak on that right now and go through some of the challenges. So first things first, I might actually just unlock this one at a time. We had like a lot of underperforming sales teams. Now, a lot of our sales teams, they were honestly underperforming, probably like about half of them. And a few things that stood out here was this. You can only think as big as your manager. July is a bad month mindset that really fucked us over. And, standards for everything. Now, I'm going to roll through what I mean by that. We had someone in particular that, basically just came with this mindset like, oh, July is traditionally a slower month. It's a bit more difficult. And as a result, what do all the sales reps do? They develop a bias that people are not trying to take action because it's a summer, or people don't show up because they're on holiday. So what happens? Show rates across the board decreased, one call close decreased, and even follow-ups, like when we projected what we projected to collect versus what we actually collect, was a massive decline because people had this bias. And so when they showed up on sales calls, the prospect would say something that would confirm their bias. So that was a massive issue. And the second thing that really showed up to me was on a particular sales team, the sales manager thought that this much was possible, right? And so it basically like the way they communicated with the sales reps was, this is a good ceiling. And so therefore the sales reps just kind of rolled in with that. We had a really shitty start to the month, did really bloody bad. And then towards the end, they're like, oh, we need to hit like this standard here, and which was way too low set. And then so they kind of just hit that. But obviously, give or take, that really impacted us because based on the lead flow that we've generated, we could have done double that number, should have hit like $1 million, And so that really showed me that because the mindset or like the way this manager was thinking really held the entire team back. And so that really showed as a result that obviously their standards weren't the highest. So as a result, for myself as a marketer, I had to go in and basically like reframe the sales manager and kind of like make him understand that like, hey, look, we're playing it too small. Like you've just settled here versus like actually thinking bigger and like hitting the numbers that are needed. Right. And then the moment they realized to think bigger, and I basically was like, hey, look, if you fuck this up, we're not going to do well, you know? They immediately jumped into action, raised the bar across the board with their entire sales team, and that resulted in us making a bunch more money towards the end of the month. And, you know, hopefully now leading into August, we'll take us past $1 million a month. Second thing is like a ManyChat glitch. And honestly, this was the most painful thing ever. So we leveraged ManyChat quite a bit. And so essentially, this month, all of a sudden, we had 60% of setter teams massively underperform, which was honestly a bit ironic because I spoke on DM setting a lot of Jeremy Haynes' place. But once I dug into it, because none of the setter managers would do it, I realized that there was a massive issue where I'm not sure whether it's an Instagram algorithm change, whether it's a ManyChat settings change, but we basically went from having an 80% open rate to having like a 40% open rate. So to give you an example, if somebody comments a keyword on a post, it sends you an automated ManyChat message. So we went from 80% of DMs opened to, 40% of them being open. So if you look back up, right across the board, let's assume that it was a 40% open rate. So basically, we just went to only having 16,000 leads, right, that we could potentially interact with versus like 32. So it's like, it basically like cuts them in half, right? So it cuts our lead flow technically in half. We still had the 42,000 leads, but like they weren't opened, like something was missing, right? It's kind of like when your email delivery goes to shit. And then the issue was we didn't really realize it until I kind of launched an investigation and realized, because we tried a different way of traffic, some like different way of like getting followers in, that caused people not to get the message or get stuck in the requests folder, and that screwed up with the open rate as well as the response rate, like people opening the message but then not responding. And then setters not seeing that, they just settle for like, this person didn't respond, right? So that was a really big thing. So it took me kind of going back to the entire DM team being like, hey guys, you guys got to figure this out. You guys got to split test, right? And then until the setters actually started to take action on it, like 3/4 of the month was gone. So this was a massive fuck up, and that led to really bad setter performance, which again, right, that means the booked call should have been closer to 4,000 really, if I'm being honest. And that would have really like, if you look at like, this is probably closer, honestly, this metric is slightly off. If we had booked an extra $1,000, we would have made an extra $600K minimum. It's probably more like 800 to $900K in sales. So that's really like massive opportunity cost. So with that said, that was a big change. Like that's one of the big focuses that we'll get to in a second. And the last thing is like data transparency. Just honestly, with some clients, and it's probably a mistake on our part, honestly, we're just fishing in the dark in terms of data because they either want to house it in-house, like just don't share the data transparently, or like they don't really cooperate. And then when you ask for it, they basically try to like be rude about it. So that actually like really caused us to not be able to make data-driven decisions, and probably get fucked out of some sales. So, but at the end of the day, that's our responsibility. And so I realized that like being able to properly track data in-house and like forcing clients on that is a massive opportunity lever, because if we learn how to better track and understand and evaluate data, we can give clients better feedback. And so, that's one thing that we're definitely going to focus on. And then obviously just sales teams in of itself. So I know I tapped into this, but it's a bit different thing. I personally, I clashed with a few sales teams because they looked at what I was trying to communicate to them as like, hey, we should be doing this. They're like, this is not possible, right? But the reason for that is because I think they haven't worked with our type of traffic before and they don't understand like our type of traffic. Instagram organic is very different towards like webinars, VSL leads, or like, like your average like lead that you get that's a bit cold. So therefore, like we have very different metrics. Like if a sales team selling a 10K plus product, I would expect, the cash per call, like what we collect per call booked, to be at like 1.5K per month, right? Whereas, on different sales teams, like we would be told that like, XYZ metric, which was like way off, was good enough. And then because they had so much cross-reference, they were so sold on it, but like they just didn't have our data as cross-reference. So they're just like, yeah, okay, whatever, And so that was really bad because, again, it's very different to close an Instagram organic content lead versus like a paid ad lead. It's just very different, due to the origin. And so that was really one thing that kind of messes over. And so I had to really like kind of zoom out and understand, their reference points are not the ones that we reference to. So it's like a different data category almost. And so understanding that and working on reframing them and kind of making them understand what I'm trying to say versus just being a critique person, I think is super important. Now, next I want to go into like sort of lessons and observations. One thing that honestly came across rather accidental was that utilizing SDRs is a super underleveraged activity. So mid-month, one of our clients actually fired a sales team and got someone else in. And, they basically just came in. I see like the sales channel of like 20 people. And I'm like, we're not doing numbers for 20 salespeople, And so when I look into it, it's basically like these 10, 12 SDRs that just whenever we promote a webinar, we promote an opt-in, whatever, they start dialing these opt-ins. And so, basically like we start seeing like hella calls being booked. Like I think at one point they booked like 50 calls in a single day off of like a single story or like webinar promotion. It was one of those things. And I was like, damn, like that's actually very sizable, And once I looked at that with a client that we kind of struggled with, we implemented it as well and did really well. Like we made like one story, got like a bunch of leads. And like I think we've booked in the first 4 days, we've averaged like 25 calls every 2.5 days. So like, it's been pretty damn good. And what I've kind of noticed is two things. One, when we do webinar promotions or we do like, hey, comment the keyword and I'll send you a freebie, like that's actually great leverage for us because that way we can double hammer them, which will book more and we'll build like a lead list. And it also creates good conversation, right? I obviously mentioned over here, the DM setters were underperforming. And so now with SDRs coming into place, we can actually nicely compete and leads get hit from two angles, meaning if they don't want to DM us or they feel uncomfortable with DMing, then we can call them over the phone and vice versa. So that's one thing that I really, really enjoyed and that we're actually going to double down on this month. Another lesson is kind of like being strict with DM setters, right? I realized that like it took me figuring everything out and then me giving them the exact split test, which is not my job position, for them to actually go and do their job. And it took me speaking to them and like kind of giving them a reframe, even though they're not my employees per se, giving them a reframe like this is your opportunity, like here's how you actually make the most out of it because they're in the DMs every day. They get to split test. And so it was kind of empowering them and like kind of getting them to think by themselves versus relying on me or being like, oh, I just need to do what I'm being told. And lastly was really big, like mindset. That was a big one because a lot of them just thought too small. They're like, I booked 5 calls today. That's great. No, you can book 10. And when they actually get to see their potential, they actually become a lot more hardworking. It's kind of crazy how that works. And then lastly is tighter client management. Again, some of our clients just like float around, and when people float around, they get shiny objects. And when they get shiny objects, they're bloody annoying to work with, which means we can't do our job properly, which means we get them worse results, and then they float around more. So it's basically when they start having shiny object syndromes or they come up with like really stupid ideas, like calling them out as them being stupid ideas and, kind of taking it from there. Again, it's the same thing that when you have an internal team, right, and your internal team starts to like brain farting and like sounding like, oh, let's do these 7 changes, and they're like 7 changes, so you can't even know which one works, or they're making this random change that has like a 2% lift versus like a 10-20% lift. So you kind of got to manage their mindset. And same thing with like focusing them on growth. We had a client that like had like a bit of a worse month, which is probably due to the sales team. And then because he didn't have data, he was just like, oh yeah, like we need to like make sure we tighten this up before we scale more. Versus going, no, the issue isn't actually with the booked calls, or the issue is with the booked calls, therefore we need to spend more, right? And kind of focusing on the growth element of things versus contracting and going like, oh, we need to cut some costs, and then, something goes to shit. So that's really something to like keeping clients focused on growth versus like, oh no, what if I lose a bit of money or not make as much as I could, has been something super key. And this is an interesting one. So I found that retargeting ads are a very good and powerful tool. Never really played around with those, they're just all organic, but basically a client of ours, like more accidentally to be honest, started running some of our content as like retargeting ads for a webinar promotion. And as a result, because obviously we then had the DM setters to reach back out, we booked calls for like $75, right? Which is actually really good. Like, if we have traditionally anything with like 100, 150 a year is pretty good. For us, anything below 100 is good. And so we're like, damn, like that's great because we can actually like capitalize better on the traffic that we generate already. We can emulate the organic effect through effective retargeting campaigns. But with that, we're also aware that like we kind of need to generate a lot more traffic. And then obviously the trial reels stuff, it's been very popular. It had a few viral posts where like, oh, you need to trial reels, it's the easiest way to grow. But we kind of tested it internally. And what we found is very interesting. If you're a small creator, this might be interesting. If you're a small creator, trial reels are awesome because it gives you a lot more exposure right? And so because the algorithm doesn't have much data on you yet, it's kind of it kind of allows you to free flow and hopefully reach the right audience. Honestly, we found that for bigger accounts, it's a zero-sum game. It doesn't really benefit much. It doesn't really generate extra crazy stuff because they already kind of know who to show your content to. And so even if you just do it, it probably goes to the wrong audience. We found on 1 or 2 occasions. But what I like trial reels for are split testing hooks. So for example, if, let's say we have a reel and my reel goes on a content calendar you should do. I can test 3 different hooks, right? And then basically like I just run them as 3 separate reels. And then within 2-3 days, the best performing one I let run as a general versus just throwing it out and trying it for fun. So that's really on like lessons and observations. And lastly, I just want to quickly go through the focus of the month. So one of the big focus that I have is like data tracking. Obviously mentioned is big lever, but also I want to separate DM leads versus like opt-in leads. So that way we can see, okay, how many opt-ins do we get and like how many DMs do we get, right? And then off of that, how many calls do we book through DM setters, how many calls do we book through basically opt-ins like SDRs, right? And then we can kind of, from there, we should get an idea of like what works better. Because one of our clients showed us data where, yeah, basically 60% of their calls come from like links being sent, they self-book. And we didn't really push self-booking links being sent out. So we're like, well, sounds like we should actually like push that a lot more. So that's pretty much it. A big one, and I think that's for me and my business partner, is like management, right? So basically like the internal team, I want to manage them a bit more closer on like the output quality and like overall productivity. I think there's a lot that we can do to do even better and get clients better results, which means we make more money as a result of it. Second thing is just client management. Again, I want to move the right needle forward and not do like pointless things. Also, if clients do stupid stuff or they do stuff I don't agree with, got to start calling that out a lot faster. And then lastly, setter management. Again, we want to track key metrics a lot better and basically start doing calls with just all the client setters in one chat and just start like roasting them if needed, for lack of better term. But it's really like getting on the setters is one thing I'm really pushing hard on. And last thing for me is personal content, which I guess sounds like a bit of a shiny object, but I think yeah, it really suits. I think it's time for me to start pushing the content a lot heavier. I'm gonna post 2 weekly content videos on YouTube, as well as 3 to 5 reels per week, and then a thread or 2 per week as well. And really just that, my goal is super simple, is 1, to attract talent that we can actually hire for our company, especially script writers, copywriters, or like, a data expert. Number 2, simply put, get better clients. I always love to speak to people that make more money, kind of build a bit of like a waiting list / like lead pool, so that when we have available spots, which they don't come often, we actually have almost like competition for them, and we really get to help the best people win that we know it's going to work for, because there's nothing I hate more than like making a pitch and like not being 100% certain that like, yeah, we're 100% going to rip, And yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is my recap for the month of July. I hope this gives you some good value or some good insights into, from an organic perspective, how we're scaling up our clients, some of the things that are working and not working. And yeah, with that being said, if you haven't already, please drop me a like, drop me a subscribe. I'm really trying to grow this channel and kind of do good with it, kind of give you guys as much value as possible. And yeah, I'll see you.